use of phenol as an adjuvant therapy. Phenol should always be used along with other measures like cementation or cryosurgery. Talking about hydrogen peroxide, these are the studies available in the literature. It is used supposed to act by efficient cleaning of the tumor cells. This is a study which has been done on hydrogen peroxide. Now, coming to the final decision, as far as adjuvants are concerned, cryosurgery provides the highest cure rate and lowest recurrence rate. However, it is difficult to handle, can damage thousand tissue, but if you have facilities, please do use it. Phenol and hydrogen peroxide are readily available and can be easily handled. These two agents must be used in all cases of extended curettage in GCTs. Now, after excision, what do we do for reconstruction? The two options available to us are arthrodesis and prosthesis. Prosthesis has an advantage of joint mobility and almost immediate weight bearing. But the thing is that in the GCT occurs in a younger age group and the life expectancy is normal. So chances of revision are very high, particularly because these tumor processes are different from the routine processes. They fail earlier than the conventional processes. And then we have the cost of surgery and the repeated surgeries. This example of a GCT of the upper humerus treated by a mega prosthesis. A good hand function, wrist and elbow are almost normal. This is immediate post-op. Talking of orthodesis, it ultimately gives rise to stable but fixed joint. There is no revision is required. The disadvantages, the gait is altered, inability to squat. This handicap may be acceptable to our patients once they are told about the need for revision surgery in case joint replacement is done. This is an example of a similar case, such a case, a recurrence of the giant cell tumor in the tibia which was operated, and this is the video of the patient. I hope it works.
जब हम बुलाएंगे ना, ये किताबें लेके आए, ये बुक्स लेके आए.
So this type of result is acceptable to our patients. Now talking of unresectable tumors, difficult sites like spine and proximal sacrum, or situation where there is a major limb loss if we try to excise the tumor. Like this case, a case of SI joint tumor with encasement of S1, S2, S3, or a patient like this where there was a neurovascular involvement and there was a distal limb edema. What are the options available to us in these cases? These are the options: radiotherapy, embolization, and medical management. I'll rush through now. Embolization, transcatheter embolization must be done whenever the tumor is at an unresectable site. It is done at monthly intervals, and subsequent embolization if it is required. As far as radiotherapy is concerned, there are several reports in the literature. These are 4 of them. Radiotherapy is useful, but there are chances of a sarcomatous changes. But the recent conclusion is that the use of modern day techniques and mega voltage radiation may help to reduce the rate of melanin transformation that was seen during the earlier phase era of orthovoltaic radiation. So nowadays we do have a role of radiotherapy in difficult situations. Well, newer modalities are bisphosphonate and denosumab. These are different literature available for use of bisphosphonates. Bisphosphonates control GCT progression by inducing apoptosis, and they directly inhibit osteoclast resorption in cases of giant cell tumors. They stabilize, prevent progression of GCT. Have not been shown to heal GCT by themselves. They must be used with other adjuvants. Rankle inhibitor, denosumab has been used in the clinical trial, but the final word is still to come out about its ultimate utility. To conclude, proceed only if histopathological diagnosis is confirmed. Grade 1 and grade 2, extended curettage plus filler plus adjuvant. In grade 3, consider excision. As a filler, bone cement is the first choice unless good bone bank with ample bone graft is available. As an adjuvant, cryotherapy is the first choice. If not available, hydrogen peroxide and phenol must be used. After excision, arthrodesis should be considered in our country. In an informed patient, in a properly informed patient, orthoplasty is a viable option. GCT at difficult sites, the modalities available to us are bisphosphonates, embolism, controlled dose radiotherapy, and denosumab. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Kapoor, for kindly finishing your talk. Now, I request Dr. M.S. Dhiran. His talk is Cartilage Repair, New Horizons. Dr. Dhiran, please. Dr. Dhiran is not here. Let me speak another.
Next speaker is Dr. Alok Agrawal.
His topic is rational antibiotic therapy. Dr. Alok Agrawal, he is a professor of orthopedics, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Raipur, CZ editor, GOTR, Central Zone of IOA, and Orthopedic Journal of MP, chapter, past honorary secretary of MP, IOA, past associate editor, IGA. Dr. Ashok Agrawal, please, sir.
Dear friends, we all are masters of using antibiotics. This lecture is giving you a rational approach so that you can use them in a major way. Advancements in orthopedic surgery relies largely on modern antibiotics. Irrational use leads to development of drug resistance, rise in hospital-acquired infections, and increased morbidity and mortality. It appears that our complacency is leading us into bigger problems in the millennium that has just dawned. Irrational prescriptions are maybe due to lack of confidence. You want the patient to get cured early. Peer pressure. Colleagues are writing heavier antibiotic, costlier. Why can we not? Patient pressure wants to get okay immediately. And company pressure, the target has to be fulfilled. There is a common misconception. Costlier must be better. But as far as antibiotics is concerned, it is not so. Antibiotics can be used for definitive therapy, empirical therapy, and prophylactic therapy. The factors which have to be considered are the type of infection, the culture antibiotic sensitivity report, the source of infection, and host factors. Like the patient's age, in infants you will not use chloramphenicol or sulfa drugs as it causes corneal tears. Below the age of 8 years, you will not use tetracyclines. It brings about discoloration of the teeth. And below 18 years, fluoroquinolones lead to arthropathy by damaging the growing cartilage. In the elderly, you have to go for dose adjustments. There may be achlorhydria affecting absorption. Drug elimination is slower, and there are increased chances of ototoxicity with aminoglycosides, especially amikacin. In pregnant ladies, penicillin, cephalosporin, INH, and ethambutol are safe. In lactating mothers, sulfa, tetracycline, metronidazole, nitrofurantoin are contraindicated. You can use these drugs with caution in pregnancy, but tetracycline, quinolone, streptomycin, erythromycin, clarithromycin, etc. are contraindicated in pregnancy. In patients of renal failure, tetracyclines are contraindicated. Aminoglycosides and cephalosporins are relatively contraindicated, but penicillins, macrolides, vancomycin and metrozil can be used. INH, ethambutol and rifampicin for TB, they are safe. In hepatic failure, no drug is absolutely contraindicated, but chloramphenicol, erythromycin, fluoroquinolones, pyrazinamide, rifampicin, INH are relatively contraindicated, while ethambutol as a ATT drug is safe, penicillins and cephalosporins are safe. You have to use bactericidal drugs in extremes of age, HIV infection, diabetes mellitus, neutropenia, splenectomy, and patients with cancer and blood dyscrasias. Sometimes you use combinations, as with multiple organisms, to completely clear the infection, and when there is a gram-positive or negative combination with anaerobes. So you have to use penicillins, aminoglycosides, or other combinations. Sometimes you use them to sharpen the effect, like cotrimoxazole is a synergistic combination. Sometimes you use them to overcome resistance, like penicillin and beta-lactamase are used for S. aureus resistance. The combinations available are ampicillin, sulbactam, amoxicillin, clavulanic acid, ticagrelor, clavulanate, and piperacillin, tazobactam. Nowadays, people are using a lot of piperacillin, tazobactam. It can be used for E. coli. But as far as Pseudomonas is concerned, this combination is inhibitory and you should not use it. Then there are irrational and harmful combinations, like using bactericidal with bacteriostatic drugs, drugs with similar toxicity, and non-existing infections being treated together. Antibiotic resistance will develop if there is an inability of the drug to reach the organism, if there is inactivation of the drug and alteration in the target. And this resistance will be acquired by mutation, which passes to the next generation by horizontal transfer or in other ways. Now we are commonly using prophylactic antibiotic therapy. The basis is, in the first 24 hours, infection depends on the number of bacteria. In the first 2 hours, there is the host defense mechanism which is active. In the next 4 hours, the number of bacteria remain constant because being born and dying are equal. This is the golden period, and this 6 hours, if you use the antibiotics, you prolong this period, and that is the basis of prophylactic antibiotic therapy. It should be safe, bactericidal, effective, and it should be effective against common bacterial on skin like S. aureus and S. epidermidis nowadays, and also E. coli in Proteus organisms. So first generation cephalosporins like cefazolin, relatively non-toxic, inexpensive, effective against most potential pathogens, more effective against S. epidermidis than the semi-synthetic penicillins. But if there is penicillins, efficacy is not good, then you go for clindamycin, and you can use vancomycin, but not as a routine for prophylaxis. A prophylactic antibiotic has to be given ideally 30 minutes before the skin incision. You have to give the maximal dose and repeat it every 4 hours. But if the surgery is going prolonged or the blood loss exceeds 1000 ml, you have to give an added dose. Don't give it after 24 hours, even if drains and catheters are in place, because it will lead to thrombophlebitis, allergic reactions, superinfections, and drug fever. If you use them longer than 4 days, there will be increased bacteremia and IV line infections in patients in the ICU. Sometimes you want to use a topical antibiotic, then it should have wide spectrum, no local irritation, low systemic absorption, low allergenicity, minimal potential to induce bacterial resistance. It should be suspendable in a physiological solution, and triple antibiotic solution is ideal. Now, what are the risk factors for infection? If you have used an antibiotic in the preceding year, if there is close crowded condition, the skin is contaminated, the skin integrity is compensated, there is frequent skin to skin contact, there are shared items, and suboptimal cleanliness. Nowadays there is a problem of antibiotic resistance like MRSA in 50% of the cases, vancomycin resistance, and MRSA is usually seen in hospital settings in long-term care facilities. It is becoming common in young healthy individuals who are working there, and there may be a mortality of 20%. It has been found that 3% of MRSA is in healthcare workers. Among orthopedic surgeons or residents, you find high level of MRSA. Even the junior resident has got it in the same level as in the institutionalized colonized patients. And so you have to go for hand hygiene for prevention of MRSA and universal decolonization of patient with mupirocin before going for total joint replacement and spine surgeries. So the treatment, go for antibiotic testing, give intravenous vancomycin, daptomycin, gentamicin for injections. In necrotizing fasciitis, you can go for clindamycin, gentamicin, rifampicin. You have to give a prophylaxis, and if there is an abscess, you have to drain it. You have to consult infectious disease consultant. Now coming to the roots of antibiotic infection, oral use is good, but if there is a high demand, you have to go for IV applications. If you want a local concentration nowadays, local delivery agents are being used instead of giving systemic antibiotics. Bone cement is ideally being used, but it has to use heat stable antibiotics like tobramycin, vancomycin, gentamicin. A 2 to 3 centimeter area around each bead has got high antibiotic concentration, and the peak usually reaches in 1 day and remains for 1 week. This local delivery system avoids systemic toxicity, however it requires removal. Antibiotic bead pouches are nowadays being used for open fractures after debridement, which keeps the limb separate, like here you can see, they are being used. And the principle is, if more than one beads are used, connect them, bring a drain out of the healthy skin, and let it drain out directly. You have to change the dressing after 48 to 72 hours. Advantage, the open wound is isolated from the hospital environment, there is a high local concentration of the antibiotic, and systemic toxicity is avoided, but there may be a theoretical rise of infection resistance. So then if you don't want to take out antibiotic cement, research is going towards biodegradable substances like proteins, bone graft materials, and synthetic polymers. Collagen, gelatin, thrombin, autologous blood clots are acting as a scaffold and biodegradable products. Collagen is available with gentamicin, which can be removed, need not be removed, as it gets dissolved in 4 days. Bone graft substitutes are being used with bone cement, but sometimes you get a purulent drainage that mimics an infection. But the patient will not be having pain, cellulitis, fever, or leukocytosis associated with infection. So it is not infection, but it is bothersome for the surgeon and the patient. So people are not using it. And then synthetic polymers are coming in vogue. Polylactide, polydilactide co-glycolides in animals, and in humans we are using lactic acid polymerase, which gives a high concentration of quinolones for up to 60 days with the highest peak on 15 days. So this is a biodegradable system. You can give local antibiotic delivery also by adding piperacillin and vancomycin to bone grafts. Now which antibiotic for bone cement? Heat stable. Quinolones should not be added. They have got a detrimental effect on chondrocytes and fracture healing. Tobramycin should not be added. It decreases cell replication. Vancomycin should not be added because it leads to local osteoblast activity reduction but less than aminoglycosides, and rifampicin and quinolones prevent bone regeneration, so never to be used. We have to contact an infectious disease consultant who can guide us for this purpose. Negative pressure wound therapy systems are coming so that there is no drainage and the wound remains healthy. Now if you want to go for intermedullary infections and take out the external fixator, reamer irrigator systems are there. Clean the canal, put an antibiotic nail, and how to put it is, you have to take a 3.5 or 4 mm Enders nail, take a 40 size French chest tube, put the nail inside it with antibiotic cement and make a uniform layer, avoid the tip from coming out and put it inside slowly, not hardly because the cement will come out. And this is the removed nail. You can see how smooth it comes if you are using a size 40 chest tube in which it is being inserted in an Enders nail. Antibiotic irrigation does not have a definitive role. Some studies have shown a decreased colony count, but it will not eradicate. For intermedullary reaming, closed suction drains of Luttenbach's are available, which give antibiotic levels and also give suction. They can be followed. And you can have adjuncts for therapies like hyperbaric oxygen for chronic osteomyelitis. You can use growth factors, bone morphogenic proteins, platelet-rich plasma as adjuvants, and pulse electromagnetic fields and ultrasound. They are shown to break the glycocalyx layer and prevent infection in implant associated with glycocalyx. So my last slide is how to promote rational use. Educational programs like I am giving today. Availability of clinical pharmacy consultants. Control of contact between medical representatives and staff physicians for various sponsorships. Restriction of hospital formulary to most needy antibiotics. Appropriate selection of sensitivity tests for organisms and site. Automatic stop orders for specific high cost agents. And a written justification why you want to use a high cost agent which is not available in the hospital. So thank you for patience here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ashok. Now the house is open for the questions.
I've got a question to Dr. Sudhir Kapoor. Dr. Kapoor, talking about fillers, you have said after evacuating a large tumor, you fill it with either bone graft or bone cement. Is there any scope for combining these two? Sandwich technique.
Yes, sir. Well,
You haven't talked about the combination, you either of them.
sir, I cannot cover everything in 12 minutes. I have given a basic ideas. A situation where the tumor is extending very near to the articular cartilage and you still feel that the filler should be used and you don't have enough of bone graft but you have enough of bone cement. In that situation, to protect the articular cartilage, it has been advised that we put a layer of bone graft or a bone substitute and over that one can use a cement. Idea is to protect the articular cartilage from the direct thermotoxic action of bone cement. There is a situation where both can be used. But it is not like this that things are mixed together and then kept.
There is a contrary belief also in some group of people. They say the exothermic reaction of the bone cement, it not only destroys the tumor cells, it also causes destruction of some of the potential bone cells in the bone graft. So there is how do you deal this controversy?
So I think that this is related to the first question. But what we are worried is to prevent damage to the article cartilage by the thermotoxic of bone cement. The rest of the bone, we are using bone cement in normal bone day in and day out. In all cases, orthoplasty. It has been relatively safe. Only thing is we want to prevent, to save the article cartilage from the effect of bone cement. That situation, keeping a layer of bone graft and then cement will suffice. But normal bone, we are using bone cement in all situations.
Dr. Yadav, sir. Dr. Yadav.
Professor Kapoor, do we understand what giant cell tumor is? Those articles which have been published till date, they all say it's a benign tumor. Do you agree in your experience that giant cell tumor is a benign tumor? At the same time, those authors, they say that the rate of recurrence after any of the treatment after curettage is to the tune of 50 to 55%. If the patient is honestly told that your recurrence rate will be around that, will the patient agree for this thing? And filling, if you pack it up properly, because for these tumors which you have shown, packing will be difficult with the bone, even with the composite graft. 35% full packing, 35 to 55% half packing, and more than 55% in no packing. This is what the literature says.
I'll try to answer the questions you have told. As far as the degree of malignancy of giant cell tumor is concerned, according to the world literature, it is a locally hostile tumor. It is different from other malignant tumors like osteosarcoma, Ewing sarcoma. The reported incidence of metastasis in giant cell tumors is 2 to 3%. So 97% are locally malignant or locally hostile bone tumors. This is one aspect. Second thing, the rate of recurrence with all the adjuvants and the technique available to us, it used to be 50% in the earlier literature. Now use of extended curettage, use of bone cement plus adjuvants. The world literature now says the recurrence rate is anywhere from 5 to 10%. I am quoting the latest world literature.
Dr. Kapoor, I have got one question. You said that grade 1 and grade 2 only curettage. But nowadays people prefer to, especially suppose osteoclastoma in the lower end of the radius, people try to excise the whole part. And this is due to recurrence is too high, 63%. Dr. Royali just said that 53, but recent literature also showed that only you do curettage and it produces a recurrence rate 63% and more. And why patient will suffer with the 63% only by curettage or in a total excision? And another thing, in case of recent osteoclastoma, they say that you do very block excision and put a bone graft, fibula graft, other iliac crest graft and other graft, but bone cement, it is definitely causes infection. Patient come with a revision of surgery and some sort of other recurrence, patient will come with a bone cement. Bone cement nowadays never preferable than bone graft. I think that. And what's your opinion?
Sir, I think my paper gave ample evidence that I have reviewed the world literature before preparing this paper. What I am quoting is the latest world literature which says, I will repeat the same answer which I gave to the previous speaker, extended curettage, bone cement, adjuvants, world literature says the recurrence rate is 5 to 10% in case of bone tumors of type 1 and type 2. Sir, what I am saying is not my own
He
experience.
said that adjuvant therapy is a very, very good therapy in the osteoclastoma, but not bone cement. Not bone cement. It is a bone graft.
Dr. Yadav, one more question on Dr. Yadav.
Dr. Yadav?
There is complication, no? Recurrence. And you treat the recurrence, again recurrence. What is the treatment of recurrence of recurrence? Locally malignant tumor.
So most of the people now say that in type 3 giant cell tumor or recurrent tumors, this is the last to seriously think of excision, not curettage.
This is the last question, sir. This is the last question. I repeat.
Nowadays with bone tumor, there is no fine needle work, only wide bone needle required. So that literature says, fine comes, it is fast it is inexpensive, it is non-traumatic, it is easy to evaluate. When you treat the student till 5 needle, when you refer to pathology, needle aspirant cytology, sometimes you wide go to get it. And third is Dr. Agarwal. Oncogene is the oncology. Oncology comes to oncogene. Oncogene was discovered by Harold Burmese and Mitchell Bishop. They told it is not infective. Gene multiplies the cell, the abnormal multiplication negates malignancy. The tons of antibiotic were given to us. The chemotherapy, surgery and radiotherapy, 3 criteria, but this antibiotic was secondary, not the thing, clarified.
Sir, this is the last question. No question will be entertained now. Doctor, please answer this question because we are getting too late and chief guest will come and we have to prepare till 6 p.m. So please I request you can ask him personally.
A very small question to Dr. Kapoor. What is your experience with denosumab, the new drug which is coming for GCT? I have no personal experience. Clinical trials are going on and last word is yet to be said about this drug.
As far as Dr. Pradhan's question is concerned, they have done a study in which they have found that the local cattle which is going with the antibiotics excreted by us, their bacterial flora are getting genetic changes and creating resistance in the bacteria for our medicines also. So genes are there which get modified and they go from one bacteria to the other in the coming ages to come, and that continues. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please accept your sign.
Now it is our duty to hand over the moment to our esteemed speaker.
And could I request Dr. Ashwini Sadani with mementos for our chairpersons, very thankfully, sir, for Dr. Abanikant Mishra and Dr. Ashok Gupta. We are very thankful for you to have conducted the session so well, beautifully running in time. It was very informative. Thank you, sir. Dr. Mahapatra.
Good evening. I'll take a little intermission. The CME booklet has arrived. Since our president is busy outside, I request our secretary, Dr. Sudhir Kapoor, to come over the dais to inaugurate. I also invite our convener, Dr. R.C. Mahandi, to release the souvenir. Please.
What's your step, sir?
Sir, thank you, sir.
So it was held up it was coming from Bombay by road. It was held up somewhere in Indore. It has just arrived. That is why we have a small 1-minute interruption for release of the book.
Okay, sir. एक मिनट में guys, 2 मिनट में
And the last session of the evening, that is research. I would request our chairpersons, Dr. Jagannath Sahu and Dr. Shailendra Bhattacharya, to take over the session, and please do manage at your best so that we can keep our time well.
This book will be available in the registration counter for all delegates.
This CME book would be available at the registration counter. You can pick up your CME book at the registration counter for all the delegates.
Okay, sir. Sir, this is the speaker's CV.
Dr. Shailendra Bhattacharya, I feel would be missing. Could I request Dr. S.S. Yadav, I have just seen him here, we could use your expertise as a chairperson, sir. Could we request you to the fore? Thank you, sir. Thank you for accepting.
आप बुलाइए।
डॉक्टर पराग संचेती पराग नहीं है? यस यस
आप पढ़िए।
Thank you, Chairperson sirs. It's indeed a great privilege to be speaking here today on the topic which is close to my heart and what is research. Before I begin, I would like to thank the Odisha Orthopedic Association for this opportunity, especially Dr. Mahapatra, Dr. Shailendra Bhattacharya, Dr. Mehra, and the whole team for this. May I have the first slide, please? So, can we put the first slide? Giving a talk in the end of the day, sometimes in a city like Agra, where Taj Mahal probably attracts more people, you're seeing the effects of the same, but nevertheless, it's an important topic. So what is research? How do we start? I think research is a way of life. That's how I see things, and we are all in our own ways doing research every day. So what do I mean by that? We are doing research actually when we are reading a textbook or actually even a magazine. Also when we read journals, when we are examining our patients, when we operate on them, and then when we evaluate them post-operatively. So research is going on at every step. And let me explain to you why do I say that. First of all, let us see what is the definition of research. It's a French word which means seeking knowledge, and ultimately research is nothing but the pursuit of knowledge for better patient care. If you see the Oxford Dictionary, it describes research as a diligent and a systematic inquiry, study or investigation into a subject, source, material in order to discover revised theories or application so as to establish facts which already exist or then reach new conclusions which haven't been talked about in the past. Research is nothing but it is gathering of data, information and facts for the advancement of knowledge and ultimately where all of us are concerned, all surgeons are concerned, for better patient care. It is ultimately the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of truth which will really prevail and give you a better outcome so as to serve our patients. How do we start research? We have to start research essentially by defining a question, asking a question. That is the basic thing. You've got to get an idea. And you can get an idea every day, every time you see a patient, read something, do something when you're traveling and you have to preserve that idea. Once you get that, then you start looking for evidence. Has anybody else already studied that idea? Does it exist? And then you appraise the evidence, whether the available evidence is enough to really sustain that idea. And then you apply the evidence, understand patient values, and ultimately this goes on, and the next speaker will tell you actually how to take this forward. So the most important thing is to set the research question. For example, we may ask, doing a knee replacement with a high flex design, is it better than doing a knee replacement with a conventional prosthesis? What is it? And it's easy to really do this research. Or you set a hypothesis that undreamed tibial nails give a better outcome in tibial shaft fracture treatment than dreamed tibial nails. So you can study 20 patients either way and then come out. So you have to set a hypothesis. It's very important that this research question is properly set because your whole architecture, your study design and your action plan is going to depend on that. And this has to be something which is going to be relevant in your practice. For example, you may ask, after doing a major hip surgery or a knee surgery, how many days do we give antibiotics? 1 day, 2 days, 3 days? Do you supplement it with oral antibiotics? And that's a question which actually is relevant. So if you do research which is relevant, you will not get tired of it. Efficient search is the way to go forward, and we can do that by reading books, and nowadays with the internet, you can get access to almost everything. So read and read. You can go to Google and you'll be surprised, this engine like Google, the kind of information it has. Of course, for us, PubMed is more important, and there are systematic ways to really read the PubMed. You can set up a title, go to the study of the title, and you can set up sub-questions and find out. And you will get so many results, and the abstracts are available free, and sometimes if you can work your way through, you can get the full text free. You need to appraise the evidence because there is so much evidence there. There are so many articles, so many books. There are more than 3,800 biomedical journals in Medline. You'll be surprised. And out of these, 375 are pertaining to orthopedics. So how many can you read? There are 7,300 citations being added weekly. And then all studies are not equally well designed. So you have to appraise the literature. You have to find out what is good. And here is something what the evidence-based medicine comes in. And this is important because of so much literature is there. You've got to see the evidence, the level of evidence, and I'll talk about it in a little time. You've got to then discuss your research project, your question with seniors, with your peers, or with somebody who has already done something, and kind of work your way through. Biostatisticians are very important, and don't let that bother you, because biostatistics can be really done by an agency. You can outsource your biostatistics. There are people, if you give them 2,000 rupees, they will give you a complete biostatistical analysis of your data. So don't let that bog you down. Don't try and find out the p-value and the t-square and the chi-square test. Don't let that bother you too much. The important thing is the initial part, how to get started. You have to brainstorm, find out the possible lacunae in your question, what is the current knowledge to these things, what are the resources you have, what can you expect if you really go through the whole thing, and for this you have to make a synopsis, and this is the abstract of the synopsis, which is very important to really make sure that this study is going to sustain and hopefully at some point of time will get a publication. So for this you have to choose the proper study design. There are various studies you can do. Either you can do a retrospective study, or prospective, that is the future, or the cross-sectional study. Now there is this hierarchy of evidence right from beginning from level 5, that is the opinion, to level 1, which are the randomized controlled trials, and you can do either of them. You will not necessarily start at level 1. You can always start with retrospective case studies or observational studies. Sometimes you have to be careful. Even if there is a level 1 study, all of them are not equally created. Let me draw your attention to one study done by Dr. Michael Brackett on the behalf of the Pfizer company, who talked about Solumedrol, and they said that it is almost very important to give Solumedrol in all paraplegics, and that was the same lab that company went to billions of dollars, and later they found out that the statistical analysis used was wrong, and the information was wrong, and the study was withdrawn. So beware of the initial appearances. Whatever looks good, the tip of the iceberg is seen, and at times you may see below there's a lot of dangerous things which can come out. You should start with easier studies, and these are the non-interventional studies, are also called as the epidemiological studies. And these are the cross-sectional observational studies, surveys. You can actually put a survey. You go to your clinic the next time you go on Monday back, give them a questionnaire, you can talk to them, what is their feeling when they come, what do they expect of you, how is their pain, is it less, and all those things. And so this can be a survey, which itself is a beginning of research. Interventional studies, when actually you're doing a surgery, and you need not start with an interventional study. Interventional studies are slightly difficult. So start with surveys, start with observational studies, and really there is a lot of information. We have these patient-answered questionnaires, and you will find them on the net very easily. The important thing is to fit the question to what population you're looking at, find out the intervention, comparison, outcomes, and let me give you an example of this. So the population, if I want to study patients with severe OA above the age of 60, so your group is defined. The intervention, I want to do knee replacement, high flex knees. My comparison is with TKR with conventionally available designs. And I want to find out at the outcome of at the end of 1 year, how much range of motion I've got. So this is the PICO format, PICO, and it's not very difficult. Tomorrow you can do this. And you can send it to the Indian Journal of Orthopedics, and Dr. Jain has done pioneering work. You go to that website, and really that is an indexed journal, and really Indian Orthopedic Association must be proud that its journal is indexed. So this is something how we can really start. Basically what you have to do is ask the question. That's the most important thing to get started. Search the literature, absorb the ideas, assimilate your thoughts. And then what you need to do is discuss, as I said, discuss with your peers, seniors, and then you educate yourself. You can attend workshops. I was really surprised when yesterday's workshop, which was organized, had only 10 or 12 registrations. That's the kind of thing. Even people are coming to you, all of us have to take that. You have to attend workshops, seminars, and take that, and then slowly climb the evidence ladder. Don't be in a hurry. Mistakes we make when we try to do it alone. We don't try to do help, and then we say, no, research is nothing, it's so tiring, it's humbug, and it's really not going to benefit me. When you try to run before we walk, and I'll tell you in a minute what it means, and starting research without proper preparation, you don't have the statistician in place, you don't have the data in place, you just have few patients, you don't have the records, and this is what is going to really frustrate you, and you're going to stop doing research. Also, when we are trying to run before you walk, that means when we try to do a randomized control study before doing even a case series or a retrospective study. So don't be in a hurry, climb the ladder stepwise. Always ask the question, acquire the knowledge, appraise yourself with the available literature in an evidence-based fashion, apply it to your particular study, act on it, and ultimately, what is important is the research begins and ends with the patient. So keep your patient always in mind. So it's important to identify the research area, do the research study, carry out the research, and proper methodical study design, and the best will always come when you get a publication. And I can tell you the joy when you get your first publication in a peer-reviewed journal. It's unimaginable. It's like ecstasy. So to conclude, I would like to say that research is like having a baby. The initial part of conceiving a baby and the act is fun. The gestation period is long because things can go wrong. You may have to abort the pregnancy because of various reasons. The labor is painful. Things can still go wrong, and we know all can go wrong. But in the end, when the baby is born, in the end, when you get a publication, you are the happiest person in this world. So friends, start doing research. It's really fun, it's satisfying. Start it now because tomorrow never comes. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Naresh Babu. He is from Hyderabad. He is a young surgeon, but very much interested on basic science researches. So Naresh Babu will speak. Please. आपके पास होगा टॉपिक?
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. At the outset, I would like to thank the Odisha Orthopedic Association for giving me this opportunity. I feel it is privileged, and then I just speak on planning and executing a clinical research. I think my job has become easy after Parag's lecture. We start off as an orthopedic surgeon. We have three important tasks to do. One is our clinical work and the teaching, and most important is contribution to the science. After acquiring the knowledge and practicing for quite a while, and then we need to pass on the wisdom what we get to the next generations, to the younger generations.
Scientific publication.
And it's a contribution to the science.
Sir Anil Jain.
Indian research, if you see, this where the wealth of clinical material what we have.
Third one is
As a nation, we are used to apply the medical knowledge generated in the West to solve our own needs. So we are just missing the obvious because we are not actively doing that research and publishing. If you just see the last year Indian spine publications, just for an example, there are just 24 publications in 1 year. So we have 10,000 orthopedic surgeons nearly, and there are 500 spine surgeons who are the ASSI members. And it works out to 14 days for one article for 500 surgeons. So if you put a crazy calculation, it's like the amount of time each of us spending on research is 50 seconds per year. So the common statement is we would love to do, but we lack the time to do it. It's understandable by the size of the population and the treatment clinical load which we have, but how our neighbors are doing. If you just see the China, the country-wide publication growth in 2013 it is somewhere around 15%. It's estimated to escalate up to 25%. But if you see the publication load and the generation of forecasted country share of India just stays at 8%, and it continues to stay at 8%. There is no high increase. So what we lack is an incentive. We need an incentive to do research. Incentive is one which keeps us running to do this. So once you have passed this stage and you want to do a study, first thing, as Dr. Parag said, we need to find what interests you. Step one is to find what area interests you. It is like we get a lot of ideas while doing our regular clinical practice or following our patients. And then when you get an idea, then we need to think about the idea. It's not very difficult to get an idea with the patient load what we have, and especially the orthopedics as a principle itself, there are divergent opinions for each single problem. So if you see simple tibial fracture can be treated multiple ways. This setting of huge population load and the divergent opinions is the perfect setting for us to do a clinical research. What we need to do is to formulate an hypothesis. What is an hypothesis? The thesis is one that the position what you believe represents the truth. And the hypothesis is the foundation on the top of which we build your thesis. So once you get a great idea, it is, the greatest ideas are worthless if you keep them to yourself, and you need to, your thought has to put into action, and you need to go on to study what you want to actually study. Then step 2 is to ask a research question. You need to ask a question, the research question has to be very specific. And the good research problem is one, after research, more people will be doing the same thing what you have done, and you have opened the door for us. And after the research, nobody can improve it, that you have closed the door. That is a perfect good research problem. If bad research problems are the one where nobody will follow the research and nobody cares what you do the research. You need to have a good research question and what you need to answer, and it should be very specific. And the art of science of knowledge is by asking the question. By culturally, as an Indians, our culture is we are lacking the research, you are asking a question. There are some good habits which have been described as a boy. You need to get up early in the morning, you have to brush your teeth. If you are playing and if you are experimenting with some equipment, it is considered as a bad habits. That's why experimenting and asking a question has been a problem in Indian culture itself. Once you find out in a question, then you need to go into further details of searching the literature and going into the greater depths. It helps you to understand the problem better, and also it helps you to how to answer the question what you had in your mind and what other people have already researched on the particular topic which you are going to study. And you will be surprised that you are not the first person to having this greatest idea, but you need to continue to do the research. There is a way to read the literature. There is a proactive and passive reading. It is not just enough to read the paper as it is. You need to read it with a critical attitude and according to your own agenda rather than what has been written. Some of the good articles as written by the good subjects, you will be actually forced into the area which you don't really understand. So you need to have your own agenda of reading the paper, reading in between the lines what is already said, and also important to know what was not said in the paper, which is your own source for the next research. So the path is the one which is very important. The research is what everybody else has seen, and to think what nobody else has thought. So we have to change our path in asking a question and then change the direction to have a different attitude towards a research question. The rule number 1 for innovation is to break the rules. History is usually created by the people who break the rules. So you start with a different idea of thinking the particular situation and then having a problem. So you define a question and then start reading about it. The guide for reading is you have to first read it to the outer circle, which is the articles surrounding the problem which you are going to study, and then you study the middle circle, which is articles about the particular type of problem which you have in your mind, and the inner circle is about the specific approach what you consider exactly fitting into your mind. And then it means that you start reading generally and then focus on the particular topic which you are going to read. After reading, you may find out that your idea has been already studied. So that is the area where usually many greatest ideas will die at this stage. You find after a greatest literature search, you find that it's already been studied. So thinking what you are late to start the research or everything has already been studied. And it is important to know that what has been already studied is already published on a similar topic. The quality and the level of evidence published is also very important. Say for an example, if you want to study the treatment of burst fractures, if there are multiple case series already published in the literature, it is not worth studying one more case series. So it is good opportunity to conduct a first comparative study on the surgical versus conservative management of these fractures. If these are already multiple comparative studies, then conducting a randomized control trial is a good idea. And if you find already multiple randomized control trials are published, then look into the sample size and power of the previous studies, and there is a good chance to perform a meta-analysis of these existing RCTs. If you find that previous studies are of small sample size, you can conduct a large RCT, and that's the way you go about. For this, you need to know the level of evidence for each thing. Level of evidence starts with the lab test first, and then the animal experiments. Then you get ideas from the editorials and opinions written with experts. Then the case reports, case series, and case control studies and cohort studies. Then randomized control trials and then meta-analysis. You need to know the level of evidence. You have to start somewhere, and then depending on your data which you have, we can conduct a study. The randomized control studies are the one where you divide the patient population into treatment group and control group, and then follow them up and compare the results. Cohort study is the one you have two different groups of patient population, you follow them separately and then compare. Case control studies are the one where there is one patient, one is a disease patient, like a cancer patient, other one is the comparison patients. You follow them and take interviews and histories of these two patients and then compare the histories and draw to conclusions. So the flow of thought should be like, here is a problem and it is an interesting problem, then if you find that it is an unsolved problem, then you get an idea. If you have that idea, you have to work for that idea and then try to do how to go forward. Once you have got this idea, then you have to write a research protocol. Write down exactly what you are planning and what you want to do. The most important part of your research is your research protocol. It needs a lot of brainstorming sessions with your co-workers or the guide which you are going to guide you. And it is mandatory how this working protocol before the start of the study itself. So so you need to cover the study group which you are going to study, the sample size, and you have to design of the study, what kind of study you are planning, and what kind of design of the study is going to answer your question. And then you have to decide on outcome measures even before study itself, and statistical checks which are required, and method of analysis. Once you have planned the protocol, you have to execute the protocol for some time, and then assess and then refine your protocol. Once that is done, you are set for the research to continue. So when to involve a statistician? It is an integral part of clinical research. Statistics are most of the studies are greatest results have been acquired by the statistics, and many conclusions of clinical research are based on statistical analysis, but they are often misused and overused. This is basically because of poor communication between the orthopedic surgeons and the statistician. So awareness in basic statistics is a must for an orthopedic surgeon because you need to judge what is statistically significant, is really clinically significant or not. Because statistics just give the values, it doesn't mean that all statistically significant issues are clinically significant. So what type of statistical tests you need to do? Some basic tests, like if you are comparing two groups, then its best test is a t-test. If you are comparing more than two groups, it's better to use a ANOVA test. If you are measuring the association between two variables, Pearson correlation coefficient is the best thing. And if you are trying to predict an outcome out of the study, then the regression or multiple regression analysis is a forward or linear regression has to be done. Then you need to find out whether it's feasible and ethical or not. Feasible in terms of equipment what you have, expertise what you got, the time constraints and the economical issues of the research, and ethical. It is very important to have ethical research and it is going to benefit the population at large or not. The science versus pseudoscience, anecdotes do not make a real science, and scientific language doesn't make the science, and bold statements do not make the claims true. And conducting a study is the most important part other than preparing the protocol. Research is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, as rightly said by Dr. Parag. Many researchers die due to poor conduction of the study and lack of continuous monitoring of the study. So we have to avoid ambition paralysis. We have to continue to go further and get the results done. After that, once your results are ready and you analyze the results, then writing the paper is very important.
Doctor, your time please wind up.
I just conclude, sir. So writing a paper is you need to get an idea, do research and write paper. Then instead you can also get an idea and write paper and do research. This focuses you to be better and focused. So finally, try to enjoy it and then don't give up. Thank you very much.
So next speaker is Professor Saraf from Banaras Hindu University. He was previously our IOA Vice President and Chairman of the Research Committee of IOA. He will speak on different difficulties we face on animal experiments especially.
Chairman, sir, and friends, first I would like to congratulate and thank the Odisha Orthopedic Club Society because they incorporated this session on basic science and orthopedic research in this CME, and I would request that in the subsequent CMEs and all the state chapter conference, this should be an integral part. The second thing is, despite this, the fag end of this CME, I could still see many of you are still listening to this session on the orthopedic research. Many of you would remember, or do you still remember this light which was sent on a Sputnik, that is the Russian, to the spacecraft, and that is what the animal testing was. But for an orthopedic surgeon or for us, there are many other areas where the animal testing is required. And remember, since morning what we are deliberating over here, the clinical research or the clinical case discussion
many of them would come only after it has been tested on the animals. That is why this particular subject or sub-subject is equally important. But then the employment of animals in the experiments is both scientific and ethical issues, and we should not forget this. As far as we, the orthopedic surgeons, are concerned, there are various applications like the newer biomaterial, chemotherapeutic drugs, stem cells, cartilage, testing joint replacement, fracture fixation, and these are the various areas which are so relevant to us, and without this, probably without testing on the animals, we cannot proceed further. Then the question comes, how are we going to select the animal? It may not be very easy. The ideal animal model is the one in which the anatomy and physiology should match the specific study design. The pathogenesis and disease processing should be parallel, that of the human. But whatever is written over there may not be possible when we come to the practical terms, because nothing can match, no one can match the human beings, but still we can find whatever may be there closely mimic to it. And when you select the animals, there are some other factors also which are important, like the cost, facility to handling the animals, resistance to the disease. But still, if you are working on a tissue engineering, the rat is very popular. For genomic studies, it is the mouse, and the cartilage, it is the mice and the rabbits which you have been studied. That's what the animal you will select if you want to carry out those subjects. So in short, we'll say the rats, mice, rabbits, these are the various animals which have been studied. The invertebrate animals are preferred, and the rabbits are probably the most popular one because their reasons, very easy handling, the cost, and the benign nature of them. The larger animals, yes, can be studied, but they are used for the testing of the joint replacement components and to study the innovative methods of fixation of the bone fragments, because their bones, their joints, their cartilage, if you work on them, probably it is a bit closer to the animal bones and the joints. So, in short, globally, all over the world, it's not only the orthopedics, but you take the other species also, it is the mice and rat which are most commonly being used. And then there comes the ethical issues. Is it ethical? Is it cruel to use animal? Is it ethical to use? Whether we should use it or not? And the reason being, there are a lot of organizations like PETA who have taken the help of many famous persons who have joined these various organizations. Their crusade against the use of animals, against the experiment was, but I wonder, those nice, beautiful faces, are they vegetarian themselves? Life has a greater intrinsic value, and the millions of animals are killed every year for food. Is medical research not a more worthy deal? We have to think before we actually oppose it. So the issue comes, is it ethical to allow humans to suffer from injury and disease when treatments and cures can be discovered through the animal research? Well, to balance it, I would say they follow certain guidelines and then you can carry out. And what are these guidelines? The animal should be used in research only when there is no suitable alternatives. The designing of research projects should be such that minimum required number of animals are used. The animal care and ethical committee should be formed in the R&D institutes. It's very important for the teaching institutes or the research institutions that you have to form the committee, you have to take their consent and the approval. If you don't do it, you can be in trouble. There are principles of 3R, reduction, refinement, and the replacement, which one has to follow to minimize. And then there are certain guidelines which have been defined. At international level, the International Committee for Laboratory Animal Science, that is what controls the care of the animal for the experimental research purposes all over the world. This is a global body and it has its clauses and the certain rules. India is also not lagging behind. Even in 1960, the rule was passed, the Animal Act was passed, the Prevention of Cruelty to the Animal Act. And the very good work has been done by INSA and the ICMR. They are constantly monitoring and watching it, and they have come out with the National Center for Laboratory Animal Sciences. It is in Hyderabad, and they are also monitoring and teaching the different institutions, their representatives are going what to do it. And if anyone of you are interested, you must go through this report which is there. This is a committee for the purpose of control and supervision of experiments on animal, CPCSEA. This is a very good guidelines. It is such a detail, probably 80 to 100 pages details are there. How to procure, what to do, how to transport, quarantine, surveillance, diagnosis, functional areas, what should be the temperature, how should be they caged, what should be their food, water, and lots of things are there. So whosoever is sincerely interested must go through it. It also tells us about how should be the OT conditions, how an animal should be anesthetized. It's not a single kind of anesthesia which is given to all the animals. And remember, the duration of the experiment should not be more than 3 years, and do not do the multiple surgical procedures on a single animal. You must always keep the record, whatever you are doing, because this is a legally important, because if anyone asks you the records, if you are not able to show it, then there could be problem. Now, this issue has been so burning all over the world since decades, that even our major research establishment all over the world, that is the AO Research Foundation, the AO Foundation